The morning of September 15, 1940, broke cold and grey over RAF Tangmere, a fighter station pressed against the southern edge of England like a clenched fist waiting to strike. The airfield was alive with the smell of aviation fuel, wet grass, and tension thick enough to taste. Hurricanes and Spitfires sat in their dispersal bays, wings slick with dew, engines silent but ready. The Battle of Britain had been raging for months, and every pilot knew that today could be the day the Luftwaffe came in force, or the day they didn't come home. Flight Lieutenant James "Kit" Harrington stood outside the operations hut, cigarette burning between his fingers, eyes scanning the low clouds that hung over the channel like a funeral shroud. He was 24 years old, looked 30, and felt 100. 3 months of daily combat had carved lines into his face and stolen the easy smile he'd worn at university. His Hurricane, P-3576, sat 30 yards away, battered but serviceable, its fabric-covered fuselage patched in 2 places from flak damage over Dover. "Kit." The voice came from behind him, sharp, clipped, unmistakably upper-class. Squadron Leader Pemberton emerged from the hut, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. "Need you for something off the books." Kit flicked his cigarette into the mud. "Off the books, sir?" Pemberton glanced left, then right. The mechanics were busy with a Spitfire's engine cowling. No one was listening. "There's a Lysander inbound from France. Picking up someone important. French resistance. The pickup point is a farm field 20 miles south of Abbeville. We need top cover." Kit felt his stomach tighten. A Lysander, slow, defenseless, built for artillery spotting and secret drops, not fighter escorts. And Abbeville was deep in occupied France, surrounded by German airfields. "When?" 1400 hours. "You'll cross the channel low, meet the Lysander over the field, and cover him while he lands and takes off. 15 minutes on the ground, max. Then you bring him home." "Alone, sir?" Pemberton's jaw tightened. "We can't spare a section. Everyone else is committed to standing patrols. The brass says this person is worth the risk. I'm saying you're the only one I trust to pull it off without making noise." Kit looked at his Hurricane again. The Merlin engine had been running rough yesterday. The riggers had worked on it half the night, but there were no guarantees. One engine. One pilot. One chance. What if Jerry's waiting? Then you make sure the Lysander gets away. Pemberton handed him a folded map with a pencil line traced across it. No radio chatter. No log entry. This mission doesn't exist. If you go down, we never sent you. Kit took the map. His hands didn't shake. They'd stopped doing that after the second week. "Understood, sir." Pemberton held his gaze for a moment longer. "Good luck, Kit." By 13:30 hours, Kit was strapped into P-3576 cockpit, helmet on, oxygen mask hanging loose at his chin. The ground crew had topped off the fuel tanks and loaded all 8 Browning .303 machine guns with a full belt of ammunition, 2,660 rounds, enough for 17 seconds of continuous fire if he needed it. He wouldn't need it. He couldn't afford to. The engine coughed, belched smoke, then roared to life with a deep, guttural snarl. The Hurricane trembled beneath him like a warhorse eager to run. Kit ran through the checks: fuel pressure, oil temperature, magnetos, trim tabs. Everything green. He waved away the chocks, nudged the throttle forward, and felt the tail come up as he rolled toward the grass strip. Tangmere Control Tower said nothing. No clearance. No acknowledgement. Kit released the brakes and shoved the throttle to the gate. The Merlin screamed. The Hurricane lunged forward, tail high, wings biting into the air. At 80 knots, Kit eased back on the stick and the fighter lifted cleanly, climbing into the overcast sky. He banked south, dropping low over the fields of Sussex, hedge-hopping at 200 feet to stay beneath German radar. The English Channel appeared ahead, gray, restless, unforgiving. Kit throttled back to cruising speed and skimmed across the waves, wingtips nearly kissing the whitecaps. The cold spray misted his windscreen. He checked his watch. 1350 hours. 10 minutes to the French coast. His mouth was dry. His heart beat steady. Somewhere ahead, a Lysander was crossing the same water, carrying a pilot who didn't know if he'd live or die in the next hour. And 20 miles inland, a stranger was waiting in a field, betting their life on 2 airplanes and a plan that didn't officially exist. Kit pushed the throttle forward and vanished into the mist. The French coast materialized out of the haze like a dark knife edge, cliffs of chalk and gray stone, scarred by years of wind and war. Kit pulled back on the stick and climbed hard, rising to 500 feet as he crossed the beach. Below him, German gun emplacements dotted the shoreline, their barrels pointed skyward like accusing fingers. He didn't see any movement. No muzzle flashes. Not yet. He checked the map strapped to his knee. The farm field was inland, southwest of Abbeville, nestled in a patchwork of hedgerows and dirt roads. The Lysander would be coming in from the west, low and slow, vulnerable to anything with wings or guns. Kit's job was simple. Be there first, watch the sky, and make sure nothing interrupted the pickup. Simple. Not easy. The French countryside unrolled beneath him. Fields of wheat and barley, stone farmhouses with red tile roofs, narrow roads lined with poplars. It looked peaceful. It wasn't. Somewhere down there, German soldiers were manning checkpoints, Gestapo agents were hunting resistance fighters, and Luftwaffe squadrons were scrambling from airfields Kit couldn't see but knew were there. He checked his watch. 13:58. 2 minutes. Then he saw it, a Lysander, black and angular, skimming low over a tree line 3 miles west. The high-wing monoplane looked awkward in the air, like a stork trying to fly in a hurricane, but it was exactly where it was supposed to be. Kit throttled back, matching the Lysander's speed, and dropped into a wide orbit above the rendezvous point. The field was small, maybe 300 yards long, bordered by hedgerows and a dirt track. No buildings. No vehicles. No sign of life. Kit's eyes scanned the horizon. Nothing. No condensation trails. No glint of sunlight on canopies. Just empty sky. Too quiet. The Lysander descended, flaps down, engine chugging as it lined up for landing. Kit saw the pilot's head in the cockpit, calm, focused, committed. The big fixed landing gear kissed the grass, and the aircraft rolled to a stop near the far hedgerow. The pilot kept the engine running. Kit circled tighter, eyes everywhere. 15 minutes, Pemberton had said. 15 minutes on the ground. Seconds ticked by. Kit saw movement near the hedgerow, a figure in dark clothing, running low across the field toward the Lysander. Then another figure. And a third. Not one passenger. 3. His throat tightened. More people meant more time. More time meant more risk. The Lysander's rear cockpit canopy slid open. The figures reached the aircraft, scrambling aboard with the desperation of people who knew what capture meant. Kit glanced at his fuel gauge, half tanks. Enough to get home if they left now. Then he saw them. 2 black dots, high and east, silhouetted against the clouds. Kit's blood turned to ice. He snapped his eyes back to the field. The Lysander's canopy was still open. The passengers were still climbing in. "Come on," Kit whispered through clenched teeth. "Come on, come on." The dots grew larger. Kit's thumb found the gun button on his control stick. He didn't press it. Not yet. Maybe they hadn't seen the Lysander. Maybe they were on patrol, bored, scanning empty fields. Then one of them rolled and dove. Messerschmitt Bf 109s. Kit's mind went cold and clear. He shoved the throttle forward, pulled the Hurricane into a climbing turn, and keyed his radio, then stopped. No radio chatter. Pemberton's orders. This mission didn't exist. The lead 109 was dropping fast, closing on the Lysander from the east. The second followed, line astern, textbook attack formation. Kit's altimeter unwound, 400 feet, 300, 250. The Merlin howled. His airspeed climbed past 280 knots. The Lysander's canopy slammed shut. The pilot shoved the throttle forward. The aircraft began to roll, picking up speed, but it was too slow, too heavy, too exposed. The lead 109 opened fire. Tracer rounds arced through the air, bright orange streaks that tore into the grass 20 yards ahead of the Lysander. The German pilot was correcting his aim, walking the rounds toward the target. Kit pulled lead, aimed 6 lengths ahead of the 109, and pressed the trigger. 8 Brownings roared to life. The Hurricane shuddered as 2,000 rounds per minute poured out of the wings. Tracers lanced across the sky, missing the 109 by inches. The German pilot broke hard left, abandoning his attack run. The second 109 saw Kit and rolled right, reversing to engage. Kit horsed the Hurricane around, bleeding speed, trying to keep the first 109 in sight while tracking the second. His vision tunneled. His breath came fast. The world shrank to angles, distances, and closing speeds. The Lysander lifted off, wheels barely clearing the hedgerow. Kit snap-rolled right as cannon shells ripped past his canopy. The second 109 flashed overhead, so close Kit could see the kill markings on its fuselage. He pulled hard into the vertical, trading speed for altitude, trying to regain position. The first 109 was coming around again, turning inside Kit's circle, gaining angle. The second climbed above, setting up for a high-side attack. Kit was alone, outnumbered, and out of options. He did the only thing he could. He dove straight at the Lysander. Kit dropped like a stone, diving toward the Lysander at 400 knots, the Hurricane's airframe groaning under the G-forces. The two 109s followed, predators sensing wounded prey. The Lysander was 50 feet off the ground, struggling for altitude, heavy with passengers and fear. The lead 109 fired again, a long, raking burst that walked across the field and clawed toward the Lysander's tail. Kit pulled out of his dive, leveled off 10 feet above the grass, and put himself between the German fighter and the lumbering transport. Cannon shells hammered into the Hurricane's tail. The aircraft shuddered violently. Red lights flashed on Kit's instrument panel, hydraulic pressure dropping, elevator trim damaged. He felt the controls go mushy in his hands. He didn't break off. He couldn't. The Lysander clawed for altitude, every second buying distance from the field. Kit stayed glued to its 6 o'clock, weaving left and right, absorbing fire meant for the transport. The Germans were good. They stayed disciplined, working as a team, one high and one low, boxing Kit in. But they made one mistake. They assumed Kit would run. Instead, he reversed hard, yanking the Hurricane into a brutal 9G turn that grayed out his vision. The damaged tail screamed in protest, but the aircraft responded. Kit came around inside the lead 109's turn radius, pulled lead, and fired a 2-second burst from point-blank range. The Brownings tore into the 109's port wing root. Fabric shredded. Glycol coolant sprayed in a white mist. The German pilot broke off, trailing smoke, diving for the deck. The second 109 was already on Kit's tail. Cannon shells punched through the Hurricane's fuselage, shredding metal and fabric. Kit felt the impact through the control stick, a sickening crunch that meant something vital had just died. The engine coughed. RPM dropped. Oil pressure spiked, then plummeted. He was done. He knew it. But the Lysander was clear, racing northwest toward the coast, already a mile away and climbing. The passengers were safe. The mission was complete. Kit rolled inverted and pulled straight down toward a wheat field. The second 109 followed, lining up for the kill shot. Kit waited until the last possible second, then chopped the throttle, popped the flaps, and stood the Hurricane on its tail. The sudden deceleration caught the German pilot off guard. The 109 overshot, flashing past Kit's nose at 300 knots. Kit didn't waste the moment. He kicked left rudder, rolled upright, and fired his remaining ammunition into the 109's belly as it passed overhead. Smoke poured from the German fighter's engine. It rolled violently, stalled, and plunged into the wheat field with a thunderous explosion that sent black smoke boiling into the sky. Kit's engine seized. The propeller stopped dead. Silence rushed in, broken only by the whistle of wind through torn fabric and the frantic hammering of his heart. He was 400 feet above occupied France with no engine, no radio, and no way home. The hurricane glided like a brick. Kit scanned for a place to land. Fields, roads, anything flat. He saw a narrow strip of pasture bordered by trees. Too short. Too rough. No choice. He aimed for it, held the nose up, let the airspeed bleed off. The ground rushed up. At 50 feet, he pulled back hard, flaring the aircraft, bleeding off the last of his speed. The hurricane dropped, slammed into the grass with bone-jarring force, bounced, and skidded sideways. The port wing hit a fence post. The aircraft spun, shedding pieces, tearing itself apart. Kit was thrown forward against his harness, then sideways, then slammed back into the seat as the hurricane ground to a halt in a cloud of dust and smoke. He sat there for 3 seconds, stunned, ears ringing. Then he smelled gasoline. Kit ripped off his harness, popped the canopy, and hauled himself out of the cockpit. His legs nearly buckled. He stumbled away from the wreck, 20 yards, 30, then turned and looked back. P-3576 was dying. Fuel leaked from ruptured tanks, pooling beneath the broken fuselage. The Merlin engine was cracked open, oil dripping into the grass. The wings were shredded, the tail barely attached. Kit heard voices, distant, shouting in German. He ran. Kit sprinted across the pasture, boots pounding the earth, breath burning in his lungs. Behind him, smoke from the wrecked hurricane rose into the sky like a black flag marking his position. The German voices grew louder. Soldiers, close, maybe 200 yards and closing fast. He hit the tree line and plunged into the underbrush, branches tearing at his flight suit, thorns ripping his hands. He didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The map Pemberton had given him was gone, lost in the crash, but Kit knew the coast was northwest. 15 miles. Maybe more. On foot. Through occupied territory. He ran until his lungs gave out, then dropped into a drainage ditch and pressed himself flat against the wet earth. Footsteps pounded past, boots on gravel, German voices barking orders. A patrol, sweeping the area. Kit held his breath, mud soaking through his clothes, heart hammering so loud he was sure they'd hear it. The patrol moved on. Kit waited 5 minutes. 10. Then he crawled out of the ditch and moved northwest, staying low, using hedgerows and ditches for cover. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the fields gold and red. Beautiful. Indifferent. He walked for hours. Twice, he hid from German trucks rumbling down dirt roads. Once, he crouched in a barn while soldiers searched a farmhouse 50 yards away. The farmer never looked in Kit's direction. Whether he saw him and chose to stay silent, or simply never noticed, Kit would never know. By nightfall, Kit reached the coast. He could hear the waves crashing against the cliffs, smell the salt in the air. But the cliffs were patrolled. Searchlights swept the shoreline every 30 seconds. Guard posts dotted the heights. There was no way down. He found a fishing shack near the cliff edge, abandoned, door hanging open. Inside, a rotting net, rusted tools, and a wooden rowboat turned upside down. Kit dragged the boat outside, checked it for holes, found none. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He waited until the moon rose, a sliver of silver in the black sky. Then he lowered the rowboat down the cliff face using the fishing net, hand over hand, muscles screaming. When he reached the bottom, he shoved the boat into the water, climbed in, and started rowing. The channel was rough. Waves slapped against the hull, soaking him, threatening to capsize the tiny boat. Kit rowed until his hands bled, then rowed some more. He had no compass, no navigation, just the stars and the faint glow of England somewhere to the north. Hours passed. His arms turned to lead. His vision blurred. He thought about the Lysander, wondered if it made it home, if the passengers were safe, if anyone even knew he'd been out here. Then he saw lights. Distant. Flickering. A coastline. Kit rowed harder, pulling with everything he had left. The lights grew brighter. He heard voices, English voices, shouting, then the roar of an engine. A Royal Navy patrol boat surged toward him, searchlight blinding, sailors leaning over the rail. Strong hands pulled him aboard. Someone wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. A voice asked who he was, where he'd come from. Kit looked up at the sailor, exhausted, shaking, alive. "Flight Lieutenant Harrington," he said quietly. "RAF Tangmere." "What squadron, sir?" Kit closed his eyes. "I can't tell you that." The Lysander landed at RAF Tangmere at 16:47 hours on September 15, 1940. The pilot filed no report. The passengers were whisked away by men in civilian clothes who asked no questions and left no paperwork. Squadron leader Pemberton met the Lysander on the tarmac, spoke briefly with the pilot, then walked back to the operations hut without a word. Kit Harington arrived back at Tangmere 3 days later, delivered by the Navy, debriefed by intelligence officers who wrote nothing down, and released without ceremony. His Hurricane, P-3576, was listed as lost in Channel training exercise. No combat report was filed. No victory claims were submitted. When Kit returned to the dispersal hut, his fellow pilots asked where he'd been. He told them he'd ditched in the channel and gotten picked up by a fishing boat. They bought him a pint and never asked again. Pemberton called him into the office the next morning. "The Lysander made it back," he said quietly. "All passengers safe. The intelligence they brought has already been passed to London. It'll save lives. Maybe change the course of the war." Kit nodded. He didn't ask for details. Didn't need them. "The mission never happened," Pemberton continued. "No record. No commendation. No medal. As far as the RAF is concerned, you spent September 15th on standby and never left the ground." "Understood, sir." Pemberton looked at him for a long moment. "How do you feel about that?" Kit thought about the two 109s burning in the French fields, the Lysander climbing safely toward England, the strangers in the rear cockpit who would never know his name. "I feel fine, sir." Pemberton nodded. "Good man." Dismissed. Kit walked out of the hut and stood in the autumn sunlight, watching a flight of Spitfires take off toward the Channel. The war would go on. More missions. More battles. More young men who'd never see 25. But somewhere in France, 3 people were alive who shouldn't be. Somewhere in London, intelligence reports were being analyzed that might shorten the war by days, weeks, months. And somewhere in the endless sky, a broken Hurricane lay in a French field, its serial number the only proof that it had ever existed at all. Kit lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and let the smoke drift away on the wind. Some flights were never written down. That didn't mean they didn't matter.